So this time I didn't ask you to read a 600-page book like Daniel Deronda. This is pretty thin, but it's very dense. There's a lot here. How many of you have read the book? No, it's very thin.
So actually, I'll do a quick introduction. It's great to have everyone here, and I know Jerry's going to be teaching with us on Zoom for a number of weeks, so it's great to have everyone here. And for those who aren't here, I know a few people told me they're planning to come and couldn't make it this evening, but also invite any friends to join, which should be an engaging and important discussion and conversation. I know, as Jerry mentioned, the book Israel Alone, which is kind of the jumping off point for the conversation. If you don't have the book yet and would like a copy, I know that Dr. Rafi Simon in our library has ordered a copy for our library and has a bulk order that he's prepared to make for anyone that would like to purchase one as well. So if you would like to either borrow it from our library or purchase, please speak with Rafi Simon and we'll get you the book if you don't have it yet. It's not a long read, as Isaak-Shapiro, as Jerry mentioned, but we're excited to have you with us. I know back in our community, virtually from California, but I know you already know many of the members in our community, and we know you as well. So I'm going to turn it over. It's wonderful to see everyone this evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Foster. Thank you. It's great to see everyone. I'm very excited about this. If I can't do it in person, lefachot, at least we can do it through the magic of Zoom. When Rabbi Foster approached me about what I would like to teach, I had just read through Bernard-Henri's Levy's book, and I'm a huge fan of his. I've read a number of his books. They are dense. I can only imagine reading them in the original French, which I cannot do. So forgive me, any Francophiles, for my mispronouncing anything in French. Let me talk a little bit about Bernard-Henri Levy. People refer to him as BHL, Bernard-Henri Levy. But what Professor Levy has done, and then as Rabbi Foster said, I just want to use this as a jumping off point. If you've read the book, yafeh, that's wonderful, and we can talk about some of the specifics. If not, don't worry, you're not. I think you're missing something, and you should read it. But for the purposes of our conversation, don't worry about it. You can jump in. But I did want to frame the conversation with this. So Israel Alone, it's obviously in the aftermath of October 7th, and what Levy, who is a philosopher, a war reporter, a fascinating man, he was one of the leading characters in what the French call the new philosophers. In the early to mid 70s, there was a new wave of philosophers who came out, and he's really one of the leading protagonists. So let's talk a little bit about him and then get into this. And please, even though this is Zoom, I really want this to be as much a dialogue as possible. Levy was born in 1948. He was born in Algeria. What's important, those of you know, when I teach Torah and I speak about the commentators, I always want to know the background of the commentators because I think it informs us about who they are and their background. So he was born to a wealthy family. He was born in 1948, so he's about 76, 77 years old. Born in Algeria, spent his childhood in France and Morocco, and got a degree in philosophy. He's also been a war correspondent, a reporter, a journalist, and he sees himself as a philosopher. The French see him as a quote-unquote public intellectual. Very interesting man, not without controversy. Bret Stephens, who many of you know, I imagine, Mr. Stevens used to work for the Wall Street Journal. He now is a columnist for the Times. He was the editor for the Jerusalem Post for a number of years. Bret Stephens says that Levy is prone to, I love this phrase, metaphor salads. He's complicated and he's whimsical, and sometimes it's hard to keep up with his language. Stephen says Levy's prose, it's easy, almost fun to mock it. It's also a mistake to do so. His book is important. Its importance stems first from Levy's unabashed Zionism, which today is an act of moral and even physical courage, especially in Europe. And Stephen says it stems also from getting something of the important things about the war in Gaza right, that Hamas, number one, in its cynicism, is responsible for every death, Israeli and Palestinian alike, that the behavior toward Israel by groups like Amnesty International and the Red Cross is a disgrace, that anti-Zionism is the most effective method for today's anti-Semites to express their hatred of Jews, and that the core problem between Israel and the Palestinians is a 76-year-old Palestinian refusal to genuinely accept a Jewish state in any border. Most of all, it stems from Levy's understanding of what October 7th fully laid bare, a colony of germs that were already present in the sewers, not only of Gaza, but of the world. So this is where Levy takes off. He says, these are the germs. And anti-Semitism is the blunt, mad, almost limitless hatred of Jews seen in the euphoria that their mass murder elicited from Times Square to the Sydney Opera House. There's a moral inversion, Levy says, that October 7th immediately blamed the victims, and it was how Israel's war of self-defense was treated actually as a war of aggression. Another inversion, that October 7th was so well documented, I'm sure you've seen the footage, that Hamas had their, quote, militants, their operatives, their murderers wear cameras on their vests. It was so well documented, but the documentation was quickly erased and questioned and trivialized and ultimately denied. Therefore, Levy's premise about the book is that the Jews are more alone than they ever have been. So what I want to ask and have a bit of a conversation is that true? Are we, as the Jewish community in Israel, more alone than ever? More alone than during the Shoah, during the late 30s and 40s? More alone when in the States, we occupy, at least for now, seats of great power and influence. The current Secretary of State, the current Homeland Security head, the head of the Federal Reserve, the head, for now, the Senate Majority Leader. 6 of the 10 richest Americans happen to be Jews. So I want to put it out to you before I go further, just right now, if you've read that or if you've now just heard it for the first time, is Bernard-Henri Levy right? Is Israel more alone than ever? You can use that funny little hand thing or just speak up.
They are and they aren't, because they had an Israel Bond dinner last night, and Adi Aloni spoke, and he was saying, what some of us have known is that Jordan and Saudi Arabia have talked to Israel for years. In other words, they're all very secretive about their relationship with Israel. They want the good things Israel has, the tech, all the knowledge, the desalinization, the economy. They're afraid they're going to lose the money from oil and they're going to need something else, and Israel has the know-how for it.
So you're saying,
but they shut up because they're people, otherwise they'll be thrown over.
okay, so I don't want to put words in Sheila's mouth, but in essence, that's a transactional relationship. They're getting something from Israel, thereby they're okay not to yell and scream, not to not be allies, but not to necessarily be overt about it. other people, do you have
will
this
you-
sense?
Would
Yes.
you clarify though, one thing for me?
Yes.
When you say Israel, do you mean collectively Jews? Because when you use the Shoah example, obviously the state didn't exist. Because to me, collective works. But if you had asked me to pick a time when Jews were most alone, I would have said during the Crusades, even more
Okay.
than the Shoah. But then
Well,
that gets into what you mean by Israel and not.
I think that's a great question, and I agree with you. When I first read it, now I've read it 3 times just because I'm an obsessive. It occurred to me: is he speaking about Israel, qua Israel, the nation state, or the people, or the people, the nation state, but not within boundaries? And you're right. I can think of a lot of times in Jewish history where whether it's the Middle Ages or whether it was 16th century Poland, when we were or the Soviet Union, or during Spain's Inquisition, a lot of times when we were alone. So he's speaking directly about the state of Israel, but I think by implication, he's wondering about the people Israel. I can tell you now, I'm working for the Federation here in Orange County, and much of my portfolio is addressing anti-Semitism on college campuses, in the high schools, in curricula, in textbooks. And I've been doing this a long, long time. It does feel different. And I'm not a doom and gloomer. I don't check under a bed at night for Nazis and Arab terrorists. And yet at the same time, it does feel like a sea change. So for Levy, he's speaking directly about the state of Israel, the nation state of Israel. But I'm wondering, I speak to parents and students and all the time. There is a sense out there that the community feels more alone. And I'm wondering from a couple others of you who shot their hands or gave me a look on Zoom, does it feel different? More alone than ever is a superlative. Does it feel more alone, period, than it did before October 7th?
Jerry?
Sonia, and then who?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sonia, and then, okay.
I think the one thing Israel doesn't do is a lot of public relations, and the news every day. The common citizen here in the States looks at the news, all they see is all the Palestinians in Gaza who have been killed. And they look at Israel as being a perpetrator.
And you're saying that that's different than it had been before
Yes.
October 7th?
And I'm talking to common people here in the building and elsewhere. I'm very careful about, talking to non-Jews anymore.
Okay.
And I mean, these are people who are not going to do anything violent. They're forming a very bad opinion of Israelis.
Of Israelis or of Israelis and Jews?
Well, mostly Israelis, but we're grouped in with them.
Okay. Somebody else was about to say something. I'm sorry. I'm trying to look on the screen. So let me.
I think
Yes.
things are more open in the open and less hidden since October the 7th, and they look like they flagrant and unchecked by and large.
I went to a lecture last night. Amazing. The gentleman who had been Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s chief speechwriter was very, very close with him, so much so that he referred to Dr. King as Martin. He was talking about the traditional African-American Jewish alliance from the 60s. But somebody else who was facilitating the conversation noted that there's been a 400% increase in anti-Semitic reported anti-Semitic actions in just this last year, a little over a year, since October 7th. So you're right, the number, and it's notoriously a low count. Those who report anti-Semitic actions usually underreport. So 400% is just extraordinary. On college campuses, there were 59 acts of physical violence against Jewish students last year, where just a few years ago, there were literally just less than 10. So there is something out there. What Brett Stevens, to go back to him again, in a review about this book said, going through Jewish history, the recurring nightmare of Jewish history is that our zenith often proves to be our precipice. For example, the quote, golden age of Spain. We all know, many of us have studied, have read, we tout the golden age of Spain all the time, until it becomes the Inquisition, right? We have tremendous experiences in many other countries until we don't. So I thought that phrase was very poignant and frightening. The recurring nightmare of Jewish history is that our zenith often proves to be our precipice. Until October 7th, Israel as a haven was empirically true. A Jew, let's say a Jew in France, kind of tired of wearing his kippah and getting dirty looks or getting comments, putting a hat on it, could go to Israel and feel better protected as a Jew. Maybe not completely safe, because Israel is not completely safe, but in some way safer as a Jew living a Jewish life. But post-October 7th, there are conversations in Europe and all over, but particularly in Europe, wondering if, in Levy's word, has the refuge become a trap? October 7th, this is Bernard Levy, October 7th marks the alignment for the worse of Israel with the diaspora. What he's suggesting is that what died on October 7th was the conviction that Zionism still gave the best answer to the Jews' most pressing problem, the need to survive. Is he saying that no place is safe? And I'm wondering, do you agree with that? And think also, while you're mulling that over, about your children, if you're lucky enough to have grandchildren, or if your parents were here today, would they be saying the same thing from their perspective? Is it not safe to be a Jew?
Well, personally, I haven't found that to be a factor, but looking at the news, one wonders.
Anyone else? What do you hear from the people in other generations, say your children or perhaps grandchildren, if they're going to school, if they're on college campuses? Anything?
Yep. I have a grandson who's at Boston University. Last year, he was the head of the Jewish group, and he noticed a lot of what was going on. He was very upset.
If you can, mute yourself until you're speaking. There are many, I'll say out here, California is quite different than Cleveland. But when I was still at a school here or in the Federation, there are people who are deciding not to wear, the tag about the hostages unless they're going to someplace Jewish, a synagogue or a rally, to put a hat on, or not to wear a kippah at all. Yes.
Yeah.
Who is that? Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. So I'm wondering how accurate Levy is. Before October 7th, Israel's isolation was diminishing in almost every category. And Yeah, on this, yeah, you all probably know, or many of you know the old Jewish joke. A telegram comes and it says, start worrying now, details to follow, right? We're always worrying about what's happening. But before October 7th, we were really riding high. Foreign policy, the Abraham Accords, whether you were happy with former president, now soon to be president again, Trump, under his administration, the Abraham Accords made some amazing things happen. Relations with Bahrain, with Morocco, capped 30 years of diplomatic openings. There was even a hint of normalization with Saudi Arabia. Economically, Israel was just blowing the roof off. Between 2002, during the Intifada, when Debbie and I and our children were still living in Jerusalem, to 2022, Israeli exports quadrupled. Israel has contracts right now to supply 130 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Egypt and Jordan. Israel, some of you may know, supplies the British Army with protective systems for their tanks. And Israel sells spyware to the FBI in the States. In tourism, 2019, Israel is the #1 exporter of academic talent to the US. There was huge optimism before October 7th and huge pessimism immediately after October 7th. So what Brett Stevens asks and other people ask is Henri Levy's pessimism too pessimistic? So I open it up to you as well. When Levy says Israel is alone, I want to, and I'm going to get into detail of his examples, but I'm just curious what you're all seeing and thinking and feeling. And remember, there's a difference between what we know and what we feel. The statistics might not bear out Israel's alone, but almost all the Pew Research and the ADL surveys and everything else says Jews, even if they haven't experienced anti-Semitism directly, personally, feel that it's out there, feel and believe that it's worse than ever, even if it hasn't happened to them. So I'll turn it back to you again. Does this resonate? Does his quote unquote pessimism resonate with you, or do you think that he's gone too far?
My daughter feels scared.
And let people know where
she lives in Baltimore. She lives near the Hopkins campus. She lives in an area which, in back of where she lives, is, I guess, MAGA territory. I mean, these are, I don't know how to describe them. It's called Hamden. And I don't know how to compare it to anything in the Cleveland. But she was just telling me that she and her friends are combing through their Facebook people to get rid of anybody who they think might be offended by the fact that she's Jewish. I mean, it is also, interestingly, combined with Trump's victory. In other words, she's getting to feel worse. She's ready to, she said, if I didn't stay here, if I weren't living here, she would very seriously consider leaving.
And I've heard that from a number of people, both here, online, friends. People are thinking about Canada, Germany, Israel, of course.
But Canada isn't any better. I mean, Aya says, I keep saying, is something really better? And she yells at me. She says, Abba didn't, his father didn't want to leave in time, and they just made it out in March of 39 when they left Germany. Because everybody thought it would, pass.
Are people feeling similarly, or have heard other people?
Look, am I unmuted? Reading all the media and watching the media, it's like anything that's said by Hamas or any anti-Israel group, it's accepted as face value. But if Israel makes a statement, it's always they allege. We can't verify it. In that way, Israel is certainly alone.
Well, and I suggest to you, if you're able, I don't know what platforms you're viewing the news, take a look at news that originates from Europe. If you're concerned about American sources, many in Europe, either the BBC or even Sky News, or if you're able to, understand other languages, it's often that case as well. What Stevens and others say why Levy's pessimism is quote unquote too pessimistic is that Levy didn't take into account a number of positive trends. We're so focused, as I am now in this position, on what's going on certain campuses, but according to Stevens, who by the way self-identifies as center-right and old school conservative, he says that Levy didn't take or doesn't take into account the fact that there is a virtual absence of anti-Israel protests on most campuses, but a handful of them get the press, UCLA and Columbia, et cetera, but the vast majority don't have these protests, aren't supportive of Hamas, so that Levy's not taking into account. He's also not taking into account that within the last year, over 50,000 tons of arms and war material have come from the United States to Israel. We speak about, or many people speak about, the quote-unquote frosty relations between perhaps President Biden and Bibi Netanyahu, or Washington and Jerusalem, without personalizing it. But somehow we don't take into account how many arms nearly immediately were shipped to Israel. We also don't take into account that nearly all Republicans, not all, but nearly all, have offered full-throated support of Israel. And what's fascinating is somebody who's studied political science and international relations, we also take into account the near silence from the Arab governments, not the Arab street, but the Arab governments about Gaza. Yes, there have been some protests and some words lodged, but compared to what it used to be, 10, much less 20, much less 30 years ago, nearly no Arab capital has been yelling and screaming about what Israel is doing in Gaza. So for those reasons, Stevens and many of others say, yalla guys, you're way too pessimistic. But like I said about that old joke, it's about start worrying now, we'll send you the details. That somehow it's not in our DNA to accept good, positive news. Stevens himself says, well, it doesn't deny that things are worse for Israel today than they were before October 7th, but they are not unrelievably bleak. So that's a pretty low bar. The optimist in this conversation between Levy and Stevens is saying, well, at least they're not unrelievably bleak. We continue to have millions of friends and admirers all over the world. In the US, Israel maintains an astonishing capacity to persevere through trials that would break other nations. Another thing, trying to find a silver lining, Israel's weaknesses were exposed, but more so were the weaknesses of its enemies, right? So what the IDF and the Mossad was able to accomplish with walkie-talkies and pagers and pinpointing assassinations was extraordinary. Being able to target an assassination of the Hamas leader, Haniya, in a Tehran safe house is just extraordinary. It ranks with what happened in Entebbe. So for all those reasons, people, I've been reading a lot of reviews about Levy's book, say that he went too far with his pessimism. Interestingly, a number of philosophers have said perhaps the most important aspect to consider is that, quote unquote, an ancient Jewish instinct for danger has been dormant too long has now been reawakened. So our radar has been reawakened. Sheila.
What is almost as upsetting is just the way Israel internally is at war with itself. I mean, this business with Bibi and the judges, that internal fight, this is what almost worries me more, because by doing that, they are allowing Hamas and all the enemies to take advantage of Israel.
So Sheila's referring to the quote unquote judicial reform before the war, of course, and that's been in open sources now with Hamas, and they were very meticulously planning this for literally years. In the sources that Israel recovered, there was direct reference to this, that Israel is weaker now than they have been because they've been arguing with each other. So in some way, when the rabbis talk about sinat chinam, baseless hatred, and one of the reasons why the Second Temple was supposedly destroyed is because Jews informed on other Jews, didn't get along with other Jews. Historically, that's a bit of a stretch. We were fighting the greatest empire of its day. So to say that, it was on us because we were fighting with each other, there's a little bit of truth to that, but it was also, guys, even if we were united, it wasn't necessarily possible for us to defeat mighty Rome. This is another case, though. Our focus was on the courts and the judicial reform and the protests. I'm not just saying that the protests were wrong, but so much energy went into that we left ourselves open.
Well, what about what's happened on October the 5th in Israel with Netanyahu firing Gallant for really ridiculous reasons? The true reasons is Gallant is the only adult in the room telling the truth to Netanyahu, who doesn't like this. And Daniel Gorders interviewed Ari Shavit today. Both he and Hartman on his podcast both talked about October the 5th is the worst day since last year's October the 7th.
Fascinating. I haven't read that, or I haven't listened to Danny's most recent podcast. If those of you who haven't subscribed, this is not a commercial for my friend and teacher and colleague, but Dan Gordis has a really wonderful newsletter called Israel from the Inside, and he does frequent podcasts with Israel's senior leadership. So that sounds like something we should all listen to. Bijan? You're muted.
How about now?
Yes, good.
All right. I wanted to say that there is really a lot of truth about what you mentioned regards to what happened during the Second Temple time, the issue of self-hatred and Jews, hating each other and so on. And there is absolutely, positively no doubt that a major factor that brought up October 7 was exactly this issue, like you referred to, the problem of judicial reform and people burning tires on the street, closing up highways, pilots saying we are not going to fly off, the reservists saying we are not going to show up, and so on and so forth. And that's that. On the other hand, unfortunately, with all the pain, ever since October 8th, just a day after what happened, people were already talking about the state of Israel, and Jews got a golden opportunity People say, what do you mean? 1,200 people got killed. What kind of golden opportunity is this? Well, they say, now we woke up and now we have a chance to do a real job and to finish a real job, meaning to do away with this terrorist organization. And as we can see, it's been extremely painful, of course. 800 or so have been already perished in the war itself, on top of the 1,200. And we have all the hostages. So it's been very painful, but I think most people would agree that it is going well. And everything, of course, is subject to change and evolution. And with coming of Trump, I think it would continue to go at the same trajectory. And hopefully, Western countries will come to the conclusion that the time has to come to either directly and directly and forcefully remove that regime from power, just like they did during the time of the peanut president, Carter, or it is time to produce conditions that the people can revolt and topple the regime. And I believe it will happen. It's going to be still very tough. It's going to be very painful. It may take long time still, but looking at the glass, half full, it looks like Israel might be able to achieve this. Also, I want to say that it's been absolutely remarkable in spite of all the difficulties and all the differences in the Israeli society. It is remarkable and almost miraculous how these people, the Israeli society, that was so fabricated, there were so many different divisions among them, they got together and they kind of, what was it called? They got together and they're doing a good job in spite of all of that. Thank you.
So that's actually, thank you, Bijan. That's actually one of Levy's points, that in the midst of terrible catastrophes, one of the, quote, silver linings wasn't about the government, wasn't about the leadership, it was about Amcha, about the people uniting. Our daughter, we were chatting beforehand, Nomi, she and her friends, a number of them were called up. One of her closest friends just had a first child, and her husband, another friend of our daughter's, was called up again for a second time. Somebody we know works in the bank. Her daughter's 19. Just wrote us that she, quote unquote, caught a terrorist. Her twin 19-year-old daughters are both in combat. Everybody either knows somebody or knows somebody who knows somebody who's been directly affected, right? And while people were terribly upset with the IDF, with the leadership, with the government for sure, the people really came together to support each other. People we know who are way past Army age, were putting sandwiches together and bringing them to the front, or doing what they could, or whatever, in ways large and small. So when Levy talks about Israel being, quote, more alone than ever, the flip side of being more alone is that they were showing more unity about being, there for each other. Maybe it's a terrible thing that we have to be so beset by enemies to finally realize that we need each other, but that was one of the silver linings. I want to also mention something that Levy speaks about and writes about in the book, in about the third chapter. He compares what happened now to the 80s and 90s. In that time in the 1990s, I was primarily working the JCRC in San Francisco and the greater Bay Area. I was our community's Middle East spokesperson and worked with congressional offices and the media about that. So throughout the 90s, Israelis chose what Levy calls ingratiation, not assimilation, but ingratiation as a tactic to be accepted. And American Jews have almost always tried ingratiating, an attempt to be liked, to be funny, to be vulnerable, to be accessible, emphasizing the universal, not the particular, ingratiating ourselves, in TV, in movies, in our books, to be accepted, right? It wasn't so terrible as, I'm not talking about the old in the 20s and 30s, Shosh still, don't put your head up, they hate us, but it was more passive ingratiation. Please, let's be accepted. So his point is that Israel through the 90s chose ingratiation, beginning with the White House handshake on the handshake on the White House lawn between Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin that opened the Oslo Accords. That led to the Nobel Peace Prize and a peace treaty with Jordan, and briefly, very good times for Israel in certain areas of the world. But according to Levy and even Brett Stevens also, it also led to a disaster for two reasons. One was Israel's enemies smelled weakness, and two, Israel's friends expected pliancy. So here, follow the thinking that because of this natural tendency of American Jews to try to be accepted, they in Israel tried so hard. This is his thesis. Let's come to grips with Yasser Arafat, our lifelong enemy. Let's sign a peace treaty. Let's propose giving up land for peace. We'll do anything for peace. That our enemies saw that as weakness, not strength. And our friends said, okay, what else do you have? And they expected pliancy. Every Israeli concession became the occasion to demand another concession. That was called, quote unquote, taking risks for peace. And every concession became an opportunity for Palestinian incitement and terrorism and rejection. So as I mentioned, you know that Debbie and I and Josh and Nomi lived in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. So the 90s was this period of, wow, look what's happening. We signed a peace treaty with Jordan. We're doing better with Egypt. The White House lawn ceremony, the Declaration of Principles, the Oslo Accords. And and a proposal by Ehud Barak, Israel's prime minister, to Yasser Arafat at Camp David of a tremendously generous proposal for genuine peace. 96%, I think it was 96%, maybe 94% of the quote unquote West Bank, with a swath of land inside. Israel was going to keep 4 or 6% of the West Bank where Efrat is, and Ma'ale Adumim, and the major settlements. President Clinton thought that that was an amazing deal and that they were that close. And at the end of the day, Yasser Arafat said no. A few years later, Ehud Olmert, another Israeli prime minister, offered even a little bit more, and Arafat, that time Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, also said no. So, so one by one, Israel, was proposing more and more, and they were rejected. Every concession became an opportunity for Palestinian incitement, terrorism, and rejection. So, by the end of Israel's 7-year quest to earn the world's favor, including the withdrawal from southern Lebanon, including the withdrawal from most of Gaza, and nearly every Palestinian city and town, along with Israel's declared willingness to accept a Palestinian state, it wasn't, and Levy says, and it could never be enough. when the long train of concessions was met with a storm of suicide bombings and shootings. Exactly when we were there, it was Israel, not the Palestinians, who were to blame. So Stevens agreeing with and departing from Levy long before October 7th, Israel was alone after the outbreak of the Second Intifada. So when Levy says that Israel is more alone than ever, Stevens and others are saying, hold your horses. We're actually Dafka alone during the Second Intifada as well. Let me pause for a little minute. Thank you, Sheila, for reminding people to turn their sound off when they're able. Hold on.
Jerry, do you see, excuse me, Jerry,
Yes.
you see the hands, Helena and Nina and Larry Rosner had their hands up for quite a long time
Oh,
too.
I'm so sorry. No, I don't. They're not showing on my screen, but go ahead, Helena.
Helena and then Nina and Larry Rosner, they're together.
Okay, thank you.
Helena?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. So I've been a while on the thing when you were asking how I feel. I've been 44 years in United States. When I came here and I said there is anti-Semitism here, my husband wanted to kill me. He said, it's all in your imagination. Well, it was not in my imagination. It was there, but it was covered with a smile on the face and a stick in the back, okay? The thing lately, after what happened after October 7, it all surfaced up. We were really sleeping for many years. And I said it many times in some meetings in the shul, that we have to wake up. And I was always looked upon weirdly that I don't know what I'm talking about. They were constantly, and I saw it on my kids who are in their 40s and 50s, and now I'm seeing it in my grandchildren who are afraid to say that they are Jews in colleges. So they definitely brainwashed our kids totally to the left, that were inhumane in Israel, and show me another army that would send flyers to the enemy to tell them where it's going to be bombarded before they do it, so they have less damages to the Ochlusia, to the civilian people. There is nothing like this. Not the United States, not Britain, nobody acted this way like the Israelis. And we are getting always the wrath that we are inhumane, and Jews are against Israel now. This is to me the worst that ever could happen. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional about it.
No, that's all right. And I'm sorry. Now the hands, I don't know why, now they're coming up on my screen. So forgive me for not calling before. Nina and Larry, I see hands by your
Yeah.
names.
I want to address your initial question was the isolation. I don't know how in Israel, but I know I'm thinking here when I'm speaking as an American, I think we feel more isolated, partially because of the media, because now all of a sudden there are more people to make us feel isolated. And in the past, there was newspapers, perhaps you spoke to others, but now we're seeing it in the news, we're reading it on social media, and so things that may have been there initially, years ago, whatever, we are seeing it live up front. So the feeling of isolation, the feeling of people against us, I think has been magnified, okay? I'm a communications major, video, and so I think that's a big part of what is going on. I think for many of us, like ourselves, I'm a second generation, and
my parents are gone, but it's something that I think they would feel strongly, simply because not just about Israel, but the fact that because the anti-Semitism has surfaced, it magnifies our feelings. We are much more closer to what happened in the Holocaust, and perhaps others who don't have that association. And so the isolation of people not being with us, I feel, is much stronger and more direct.
I think that's a good point. Our natural allies from the last number of decades, African-American community, others with whom we had some affinity, have unfortunately either been quiet or have been actively standing against us. And it's painful because, as the speaker last night, like I said, I went to this amazing lecture by the person who knew Dr. King quite well, and another gentleman who has a doctorate in social work, African-American, who chose to become a Jew. He's a Jew by choice. He was in prison for gang work. Now he's a clinical social worker and a professor. So he's a Black man who chose to be Jewish, speaks all over this area in Southern California. They were both saying that it's a crying shame that the African-American community has forgotten all that, in their words, not mine, all that they owe to the Jewish community that helped found the NAACP, that marched with Dr. King. You know, they referred to Abraham Joshua Heschel and others, that two of the three, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, were Jews who were killed in Mississippi, and on and on and on. So it hurts those of us, I would imagine every one of us who cares about social justice, that our natural allies just haven't been there. I want to make sure that we've just got 9 more minutes. If anybody else hasn't said anything, and then I want to plot out the next conversations for our next sessions. So anybody else want to
Jerry,
say something?
just a quick question. I thought on the schedule this goes to 9. It only goes to 8:30. Well, 5:30 your time.
Yeah, I only had an hour, 4:30 to 5. Well, it was 7:30 to 8:30 your time. I'll double check with Rabbi Foster. I actually have something else. I can go a little bit longer, but if so, yes, I'll block that time out from now on.
And may I ask, you're in Orange County, but are you close on the part that's close to LA?
So depends on the traffic, because there's always traffic
Right.
here. It takes about an hour to get to the closest parts of Los Angeles.
The reason why I asked, I'm actually an out-of-town member. I'm not in Ohio, but I belong to 2 conservative synagogues, this one in Cleveland and one in Los Angeles. And my Los Angeles, which is also conservative, a lot of what's gone on with targeting, like wasn't it even 2 nights ago, all these Jewish storefronts, the windows were smashed. I just wondered how, I mean, I think incidents like that shade people's perceptions, but I didn't know if Orange County was enough removed from that.
So thank you for referencing that. We're removed, at least for now, from that, but there's been tremendous anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist activity on UCI, University of California at Irvine. And city council resolutions. I'm also very active in doing that in the city of Irvine. The city of Irvine's new mayor, he was vice mayor, and now he's been elected mayor, proposed, you'll love this, a sister city relationship with Gaza City. So that's been in the news very locally. So yes, there is activity here as well. Nearly every major city, even New York, Chicago, Boston, ones with very large Jewish communities, has been experiencing something like this. So from now on, I will go longer. What I wanted to suggest, if you haven't received the book yet, I'm sorry that I don't believe it's in the library because it just came out. It's in paperback. It's relatively inexpensive. I really do encourage you to take a look at this. Another book that he wrote was The Five Kings, the End of the Empire and the Five Kings. And it's a book talking about the abrogation of U.S. power and responsibility in the world. And the Five Kings are Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, and the Sunni Arab states, meaning that when there's a vacuum of responsibility in the world, because of isolationism, because of any other reason, others will step into that vacuum. And I think it's a brilliant geopolitical treatise. I think he wrote it about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. He's prolific as hell. He's also a filmmaker, like I said, a journalist. He's reported in the forgotten war zones in the Sudan, in Burundi, in Angola, and of course he's very, very close to the situation in Israel. What I'd like to do in the next couple of conversations is to walk through some of his arguments. Again, why and how Israel finds itself, quote unquote, alone, what can be done about it, who is on the side of what he calls common sense alliance with Israel and who is not, and how this is and is not a modern day pogrom, because there are many, many who see this as nothing different than the Chmelnytsky revolt in Poland in the 16th century, or the Tsarist pogroms in Russia in the 19th century. So that's a little preview of what we'll be talking about. Any last comments?
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you say
Sheila?
you call this they're saying the pogrom took place in Israel. That is, I think, an argument we should not use, because they can say it right back to what's going on in Gaza
and
Lebanon.
the West Bank.
Yeah, and the West Bank, especially the West Bank, which is
But Sheila,
Yeah.
Sheila, the documented sadistic atrocities with the not just murdering people, but murdering them with extra dehumanization, that was part of the Nazi regime, and all sorts of, we could talk about Hebron, the Hebron massacre, all those things. I don't think that it's, if a hater's going to want to believe that Jews and Israelis endorse all this, you can't change a hater's mind. But and our speaker referred to it earlier, that, or someone, I thought, that all the documentation from the body cameras
was erased.
Wasn't enough. But the point is to not say something is a pogrom because it could be used from the other side. Even if you don't say it, it still could be used, because.
Oh yeah.
So I think those are good jumping off questions. I want to pose a couple others for the next conversation that we're going to have. That question of, is Israel alone? Is it truly more alone than ever, or has it always been, in spite of the progress that has been made? Can Amalek not be destroyed? There are those who are saying now Hamas is modern day Amalek. Is it not possible to destroy Amalek? Do we also have a hand in the continuation of Amalek? Is there, not to blame the victims, God forbid, but is there anything that we're doing or not doing that allows Amalek, our ancient enemy, to sustain itself? Those are some of the questions that I want to have a conversation about this next time. I really, really appreciate everybody coming on. These are different times. This is not business as usual. This is not, oh, we've seen this before. We have not. So it's important that we dig into this, talk about it, and make sure that particularly the younger generation, those in college, those in their 20s and 30s, establishing themselves, know our history. They have to read, they have to study. They can't just say, oh yeah, that was important then. It's important now, I'll say more than ever. So thank you so much for the conversation. I'll double check with Rabbi Foster and I'll block out the full 90 minutes the next time.
Before you finish,
Okay.
There's,
Rachel Fish recommended a YouTube video last weekend when she spoke about anti-Semitism. She spoke about a 20-year-old documentary called Columbia Unbecoming. Anybody who hasn't watched it should. It could have been recorded yesterday, 20 years ago, the same story.
Thank you. I'll take a look at that also. Columbia Unbecoming?
Yes, it's on YouTube. It's
Okay,
about a
thank you, Bernard.
37-minute documentary.
Okay.
Jerry.
Yeah,
She also said that
thank you.
what we need to do is,
Yeah,
Normally
yes.
our classes are an hour long, Jerry, but the website does say an hour and a half for this one. I just
Yeah, I'm
double.
so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm actually running into another conversation about anti-Semitism. I guess that says something. I promise we'll do the full 90 minutes the next time. So thank you, everyone. Be well, be
you.
safe.
regards
you.
to